Webinars are hot. As a content marketing professional, I've produced hundreds of videos for social and traditional media platforms and currently work with one of the largest podcast networks in the country. So for me, understanding how webinars work in the B2B space is both essential to my professional development and an exciting form of content creation. According to a study commissioned by digital agency Demandwave, 41% of B2B marketers cite webinars as the best marketing tactic for driving revenue. I've set out to discuss webinars with one of the foremost experts in the field, Matt Lay, president of the streaming network in Toronto. Together, we've created this multi-part series of videos and podcasts, the webinar Lessons from the Front Line, or How I Learned to Live with Never Getting a Second Chance with Live Virtual Events. Matt Lay, welcome back to the webinar Lessons from the Front Line. Today's episode promises to be a fun one, virtual event bloopers, horror stories from the front lines. You recently blogged about the hashtag epic fail of the live stream of the Mayweather-McGregor fight.
Yep.
I'm sure everyone's heard about it by now. Not necessarily about your blog, but certainly about the fight. Hopefully people heard about your blog. Hopefully some people, at least a decent amount of people.
A few.
While the rest of us were simply downright frustrated.
Yeah.
As a guy who depends on live streaming for your livelihood, you saw this glitch as more of a cautionary tale.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I mean, Dana took to the web and he called out his service provider, a company called New Line, and they have hosted the UFC for many years. They've hosted the UFC.tv application, and in many ways, that application or that format has really changed the way that live streaming is delivered for sporting events. If you never got a chance to experience it before, they got dumped after this fight. You're picking your own camera angles, you're creating your own replays. There's a lot of options that simply TV could never do, and in a lot of ways was better than paying for the pay-per-view on television.
Right.
So in this case, I think it's important for UFC fans to know that Dana did nothing wrong. He contracted and worked with a leading provider in the space. These guys are it's not like he cut corners from a cost perspective. I've worked with them before on some very large projects, and they're the type to ensure that the steps are taken to ensure success.
You worked with the
New Line guys.
New Line.
Yeah, I've worked with New Line before on some of the biggest events we were ever involved in before. Early on, streaming was just streaming. No one knew how to do it. Mm-hmm. So whether you were the streaming network or you were New Line or you were anyone, when someone had a problem, like when bodybuilding.com got the rights to the Arnold Classic and the Mr. Olympia, they had some issues with live streaming. They went out and found some experts. They relied on us for a couple of years. We worked with New Line from a platform perspective. So I know the way that they work, and I know that they can handle large audiences. This might have been just something unique happened. I don't know what happened.
Right.
As like I said in my blog, I would have loved to see Dana maybe not call him out. So a partner who had worked so well with them, but I know that he was facing like a class action lawsuit.
Right.
And to be clear, I have no idea what went wrong. I think it was the paywall and not the distribution.
Right.
But in the end, these types of things, they can happen. On any scale,
yeah.
Right? Not just for the fight of the century, but any event that we're doing. And these are the things that, as someone who's looking to put on a virtual event, whether it be a webinar or some sort of a broadcast of one of their corporate events, they need to watch out for.
So how do you ensure in your world that you don't come across your own epic fail?
Well, I think that platform has something to do with it. And so I would say to the buyer, if you're going out and you're looking to buy, you want to focus some time on platform, on redundancies, on the sheer volume of people that run through the platform on a daily basis. When it comes to webinars in the true sense that we all think about them, most platforms are provided by billion-dollar businesses like Cisco, Citrix, Adobe, On24 in our case. They're large organizations that have tons of customers, and for the most part, the products technically work. Mm-hmm. Now, when you get into the broadcast side, where some of us will need to do a virtual event that goes beyond the webinar, that has a live streaming component, that is maybe it's a product launch from a venue and that sort of thing. Now we get players that enter the space that don't have that type of cachet behind them from a platform, because it's actually, if you Google it and know a little bit of technical, it's actually quite easy to stream live on the internet.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do it well. It's not easy to make sure that it works, but it's quite easy to do.
There is a technology there that would allow you to
Yeah.
push a button and be live.
Right, without a lot of capital investment and capital outlay. And so when you're going out and looking, you want to make sure that the person that you're dealing with, I think, in my mind, is the person who has a platform that they can let you know why it's going to work, has been there before and knows how to act, and the person who's probably being the most cautious, who I know New Line to be in that story, even though they did have the issue, but the person who's trying to be the most cautious is probably a good person for you to work with.
Right.
I would also say that when you're in this space and you're procuring a partner for it, the old adage of throwing out the lowest bid and the highest bid is probably a good idea.
Right.
If you've got someone in there who's quoting you 10 grand to do something that everyone else is quoting you 30 grand, they are not thinking of all of the redundancies that are needed or everything that's going into this. That's a bad quote. Just like I'm sure the guy who's 5x what all the other quotes is probably a bad quote too.
Right. You speak as if from experience.
Oh yes.
So what is an example of an epic fail, hashtag, that you have been involved in?
Well, what's the adage? It's not how many times you fall down. It's how you pick yourself back up. And we've been involved in a lot of events that have had issues in the past. I mean, we produced over 20,000 of these in Canada alone. And 10, 15 years ago when we got into this, there wasn't a roadmap. No one went to school for virtual events. The internet, it wasn't young, but live streaming was not something that was happening all the time. There was no Netflix.
Right.
Even I, in the space, didn't believe Netflix would work on the web. I was like, just too much buffering, too many issues that kind of go along with it. But I can give you an example, and I can tell you the why as well. And this cautionary tale is just because you can handle complexity or that it's technically feasible and possible doesn't mean it's a good idea to do it. Always measure complexity against the outcome and the value you're going to get. So we were doing a national drug launch for a major pharmaceutical company in this country. The idea was they wanted to pull the whole country together, but still maintain a level of exclusivity to the event. So rather than simply having the event in the center of the universe in Montreal and in Toronto for French and English Canada, they had satellite sites all around the country. So when the French event happened, there were satellite sites all over Quebec and French parts of Eastern Canada. And then when they did the Toronto one, they had sites all over Canada, and even did a rebroadcast of that event for Vancouver. It was well planned, trying to bring everyone together, and us and two agencies, or one agency and one and an AV shop, were collaborating to make sure that we could bring the whole country together and be part of this. Introduce some fun technology, and we went out and did our job. Then the question was asked, and we said yes. And that question was, from the virtual venues where we have 10, 15, 20, 100 doctors coming in that isn't the main site, can we have the lead facilitator in that room come into the main room over video? Heck, we can all do it with our phones now on FaceTime. Why not just do this? And so we said that, it was feasible, and we scoped out costing for it and advised that it needed certain internet, and we were going to utilize, a video transmission mechanism. And basically in the Montreal area, it completely fell down. The people booking the venues gave us almost no time to get into the venue, so we had 3 hours to set up and test the video transport mechanism. It's not like CNN where if the guy goes down on his Skype feed, you go back to him 5 minutes later because you're on a 24/7 newsreel. It had to work in a 3-minute agenda item. There was a window, had to work kind of thing, and it completely fell down. The next day in Toronto, we redeemed ourselves with very similar conditions, but we redeemed ourselves just barely. I know that there were sites that we didn't have up when the show went live, and they worked during the 3-minute window, but it was a bit of a fluke. And so we learned lessons on that. We were at the whim of the budget, and we were at the whim of the organizers of the event, and yet we continued to push to try and make it happen, which we shouldn't have done. We should at some point said that there was a cutoff here, and didn't have the voice at the table as the virtual event planner to say, hey, why? What's the value?
Yeah.
Why are we going through this level of complexity and possible failure, and what was otherwise a flawless event on all sides? It was a great collaborative project. Why go through that? All anyone remembers in Montreal is that fail.
Right.
And all everyone remembers in Toronto as a result of that fail is that success.
Right.
And so I think that the overall experience was tarnished as a result of those mistakes.
Right. This isn't the one where the truck caught fire.
No. no. But I mean, so in that case.
Well, no, it could be another story for another time. But it's,
yeah, I think I'll get to it later.
Okay. All right. And I mean, so technology has advanced. This was how many years ago? This was 10 years ago.
Maybe not 10 years ago, but it was a few years back.
But technology has, all the technologies have advanced. Are there different problems now, or is this sort of thing still happening?
I think it's still happening,
for
100% for sure. I think it's still happening for two reasons. One is that I blame both sides of the equation for why it happens, And I've been a part of this, 10, 15 years ago, where a customer had this complex idea for something that they wanted to accomplish. And they went out and they had a budget for it. Both things, they thought, that should be able to work, and it should cost me about this much money. And then as a result, they went out and procured in that fashion. And the vendor who said yes to the money and yes to the complex problem that they've never fixed before went out and did their best job to try and make it happen, and it failed. Mm-hmm. We did what was wildly successful because of the expectations, but for most corporate clients, they would never accept the up and down, is that we did a project in that era with Cossette. And it was called the Merry Minion. We had a receptionist from Cossette, Vancouver, walking around to different places around Vancouver on, was it Valentine's Day? I think it was maybe not Valentine's Day. I forget the special occasion, but basically people go online and say, bring flowers to my wife, or bring chocolates here, or do this, pick up this laundry. And on the website, it was set to his phone, and then he'd walk around and he'd do it, except he had a little camera on his hat.
You could follow him. And
he had an encoder that they had us build on his back, and we followed him around and we walked around. This is like the week LTE or 4G got launched. And we knew where the towers were, and we told him, you can't do this, you can't do that. We don't know how it's going to work or not. But everyone went into it with the understanding that it might go down. And it went down a lot. Now, it was a fun project, but in a normal corporate event, it's not okay for things to go down a lot. And there's no ability to say yes to that. So I blame the procurement process for these events that start with the end game in mind from both a cost and a complexity standpoint. Then I also blame people who say yes when they have never done or can't ever do it before.
Right.
And so we've learned from that. And, we put we like pushing the envelope. Merry Minion was a super fun show. Fubar 2, that Canadian TV show, we did a launch of that where we streamed from the back of a truck at TIFF, and we were driving around Toronto. Tons of fun. Mm-hmm. We love pushing the envelope, or have in the past did more than we do today, but we love doing that kind of stuff. But you always got to let the customer know what are the issues that could happen by pushing the envelope. What's the fallback, which is the most important? What is the redundancy? What is the fallback if it does? But circling back to your initial point about technology and how it's improved, mobile networks have improved. I mean, Skype is now a Microsoft product that is embedded in things. So the idea of remote hits and the idea of that kind of stuff, that's changed. And we see that in media as well, right? Yeah. You see a lot more remote hits in TV than you ever did before, because you can do it from their laptop or even their phone. I think it's just important that everyone know, what they're getting into, what can set them up for the best point of success. And in a corporate event, there's always got to be a backup plan. Mm-hmm. There's always got to be a way of picking up the telephone and dialing in if you're a presenter or something like that.
Can you is there a threshold? Can you put enough money and enough resources against the thing to assure that it doesn't go sideways?
You would think so, and generally, yes, right? I mean, there's only so much redundancy that you can put in place. Generally, we always want to ensure that there are two.
Right. And
then beyond two full redundancies, there's an act of God that goes into it, right? So even on the most standard of webinar, we have A side and B side streams. If one fails, the next one can come up. We've got redundancy in that if their phone line drops, the webinar doesn't stop, and if their computer crashes, the webinar doesn't stop. You still hear their audio. So there's always a couple of levels of redundancy. On bigger events, we talked about the McGregor Mayweather fight, but there was a series of events that led up to that, which were the press tour across the country. I know the guy that did that press tour, and it was as simple as, broadcasting it from the venue, but also having a satellite truck up there as well. So if the venue broadcast went down, they could pick up the feed off satellite and send it out as its backup.
Yeah.
It was simple, expensive. A lot of corporate events won't do that, but it had that level of redundancy that, hey, if that internet went down and that truck blew up or caught fire, as you brought up, then you're then whatever. That's an act of God. We did everything that we could. As important as that stream was, we did everything that we could, right? But to the truck, and this is a good story of where the money was spent, and they couldn't guarantee and ensure success, and didn't have redundancy. So we were doing an annual meeting, virtual annual meeting from a hotel downtown that this company really liked to use. At the time, if you can believe it, there wasn't sufficient internet in the building for us to do a broadcast, nor were we able to get it in without construction costs. So construction costs for internet are tens and $20,000 of thousands of dollars. We wouldn't even got permission to do it. It was an old hotel. So we have to start moving to broadcast methods, the stuff that the TV stations use. Well, we couldn't park a satellite truck close enough. We weren't allowed, again, by regulations and by venue. And so what we had to do is we had to do something called microwave, which you might have seen those trucks start driving around the city, and they've got a little dish on them. That's not satellite, that's microwave. Right. It's pointing a signal back to, in Toronto, the CN Tower or the centralized broadcast location. Well, there was no line of sight to that location, so they had to send the signal out a window, bounce it off a truck, get it to that location where we had to set out the stream. So it was complex, but it was worked out, and it was expensive, and they used professional grade stuff. They used a major broadcaster to make this all happen. But there was just no way of having a second anything. This had to work.
No redundancy.
There's no redundancy. They just couldn't do it. It wasn't even a function of, I bet you this company would have paid for it. They were one of those companies that would have said, yeah, I get it. We got to pay for it.
You could not
We
put
could not.
The stuff in that area.
There just wasn't enough allowable parking, and the venue was the problem in this. That's what the moral of this story is. The venue was the problem, but they just couldn't. And so, yes, that is the day that the broadcast went down, and a guy from, I won't name the broadcaster's name, came in, a tech, and said, yep, we caught fire, but we put it out, and we think we're good, and we'll be up in a minute. So, I mean, in general, these guys did everything right, in that they, again, like Dana and New Lion, or like the UFC and New Lion, is they hired a vendor who told them what can and can't be done, spared no expense to make that happen. Now, the lesson in all of this is, if the virtual element of your event is important, and you know this going into your event, like it has to happen, you got to ensure that where you're coming from works. Right? I've been involved, that's a big example, but I've been involved in places where they decide they're going to do like a quarterly earnings announcement from their whatever office or from this site or this plant, and then they find out that when they get there, that phone line, there's no cell coverage, and phone lines drop all day long on the phone. So they're supposed to be announcing to the market things are going on. Well, that's a venue made a huge error.
Yeah.
Even if in this day and age, internet at a venue which is usually required for doing a virtual event of some sort, broadcast or otherwise, usually it's pretty good. If you go to the wrong venue and you decide to add this later and don't think about it, some venues still hose you big time on bringing that kind of stuff in, like thousands of dollars to add something where somewhere else you could have added it without even thinking about it. So I would say, to wrap this all up, does this kind of stuff still happen? Certainly. Planning is generally something that can really will really fix that.
Right. Yep. If you know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Let's bring it back to some more common mistakes in say webinars.
You mean other than the passing of the baton?
I don't know what that means, but sure.
I don't do this a lot, but when you're gonna, so many meeting tools or webinar tools out there that are beta meeting tools. If I'm talking and then you need to talk, I need to pass you control, which is not a big deal. Technically, it works, but no one ever trusts it's going to work. So your webinar kind of goes like this. Do you got control there, Pete? Yeah, I think I do. Did you see that slide move? Nope. Oh, yeah, I did. And there's this huge debacle, or people say they can't have control. And it's the simplest thing that messes up so many webinars. So let's talk other than that.
Other than that,
yeah.
Other than that particular thing.
Yeah.
So what's some other common mistakes?
The biggest mistake that we see today is basically pushing technology.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked a quote here. Michael Jordan's father was once quoted as saying that it's never too late to do anything that you wanted to do. He clearly was not in virtual events because sometimes it is too late. So what I mean by this is because the technologies are self-service and because the technologies generally work, like I said, all of them are generally backed by multi-billion-dollar organizations and it's meant to work, is that we can push them a little too hard. A question that we would get the first time we're working with someone is, how late can I upload my content, whether it be slides or resources or whatever? And I used to respond, why are we asking that question? Well, we're never ready on time. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So you're almost like expecting that you're going to cause chaos in your life before your webinar starts. You're expecting that.
Yeah.
And then you want to know that your technology can handle and support your chaos. Well, it doesn't take long to upload any content.
Right.
It's just like uploading to an FTP or anything. It's the time it takes.
Right.
There's a bit of a conversion. But
Slides will. I mean, that's not an issue nowadays, right? Like you put a slide in and you can upload it and.
That's right. You can just upload a slide. But here's why leaving things to the last minute or pushing the technology or pushing the limits of what's doable in the 5 or 6 minutes before an event is a mistake. So sometimes on presentations, there's a team that works on the deck and there's a team that's actually the presenter. And the deck team, they can be put through the ringers. They got to work all night long or all day. Things are changing. All the reasons that it's late is that the guys are getting them information late and then whatever. So one time, I was working with a customer who had the deck team uploading the deck directly because they were pushing it to the last minute. And I guess at one point in the process, the deck team was bored and or exhausted and or angry. And they made a decision to make a funny deck that had lewd, at the time it was like emojis on it. It had stats that were completely inaccurate, overstating sales by billions of dollars, which they thought was funny at the time. It may have even had some profanities in it. I don't remember. And in that last minute, they accidentally uploaded that deck. Presentation starts. They start pushing through, and all this crazy stuff is out there. We got called into a debrief and like blamed for it or something, when really it was their person. So that wasn't a technological error, but that was the result of uploading and trying to do everything at the very last minute. Right. Usually what happens is, you got a chart in a slide deck, it doesn't work, or you upload a resource and you name it the wrong way, or you put a poll with an error in it. Something like that happens. Right. And I mean, it's corporate communications, whatever, but the people whose their job is to run these events, it has to be perfect.
Yeah.
Almost every time.
And they have to be checking each time, right?
They do.
The technology itself is it pretty solid? I mean, is it really depending on human error here, or are there?
I mean, it's pretty solid, but I mean, if you don't check, could you imagine putting a web page live without ever checking it? This is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Not only that, you've got 200 or so people getting ready to watch, and you're putting something up in a last-minute nature and not even knowing what's there. Right? It can be embarrassing. The effect of what happens can be less about the event falling down and epic failing like some of the events we talked about before, and more about embarrassing yourself, hurting your credibility, clearly distracting from your message. And so I would say that in general, that planning to be ready, 3 hours before an event, that was kind of always our rule. We wanted to be locked 3 hours before is the best thing for your sanity and to ensure success across the board in your events.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there other common mistakes? You want to talk about anything else? Is there some other fun things we can?
I mean, yeah, but I think that, no matter how many times I tell stories about, maybe us trying something and it not working, or basically not planning appropriately, or having weird stuff occur, like someone in an airport who's presenting a webinar, which is just a lot of it just comes down to, poor planning.
Right.
And you mentioned once to me before, you've been in the live event space, right? And you probably had been part of run sheets that start the day before and go. Well, sometimes they start weeks before, but at least the day before, and it goes all the way from what's going to happen in the morning, when
this is how much time you got,
when's crew eating breakfast and what's being served, all the way up to the next day of when they go live to when the trucks are supposed to leave the building. That's the level of planning that goes into physical events. Because virtual events are, I guess, more cost effective, a second thought, a replacement for physical, we lose all of that. Formality generally gets lost in what they're doing. And I don't want to make it sound like no one takes my industry seriously and that's why problems fail, but you still have those 200 or 300 people in front of you. You should create a process that ensures that you're taking all of those steps to ensure success. Yep. That's the biggest thing that I find, is that in general there isn't one of those. Right. Webinar happens on Tuesday. What do we do again? How does it work? What's the process? When do we get the slides? And it's this new thing every single time, which causes anxiety and in the end causes issues and causes problems.
Okay. All right, it's time for a challenge.
Okay.
It's not a multi-million-dollar event with hundreds of thousands of potentially rabid fans tuning in and hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. Relatively speaking, how much does it really matter in the end when it's simply a corporate communications event? Relatively speaking.
Well, on the day that the truck caught fire, I was pretty stressed out. I remember, not knowing, if it was going to get back up and having the customer stare at me and whatnot. But a guy walked over who was running the event. He said just that to me. He's like, "We made decisions not to be doctors. In the end, this is a webcast." Whatever. Things, basically stuff happens. Yeah. We're all going to deal with it. And this was the PM on the job. And I always remember that because there's a certain truth to that, right? We have the luxury of not being brain surgeons and we can make mistakes. Yeah. But there is impact. So a couple years ago, we were doing and we're still paying for the sins of this, even though I don't know that it was actually our fault. But still, like New Line, we were doing a high-profile event, only a couple thousand viewers, not tens of thousands, and it was an earnings announcement for a major organization. On the same day, one of our technology partners who provides backbone internet for the eastern part of the United States and CDN, a bunch of stuff for technology, had a major outage and a major failure. It was significant. On the heels of that, as we started getting back up from it and recovering from that and had the systems clear, this company's event fell down. Well, it just happened that they were announcing that they had lost a major contract that they had held for years. And it was a surprise to the market that they were trying to get ahead of, letting people know we did not get this contract, but here's our good story. Right. And at about 200 or 300 people, everything stopped working due to this other issue. I don't want to get into the specifics of the whole thing. Well, that day their stock dropped. They were accused of lying to the market. We were thrown out in front of the media, not in the same way that New Lion was, but we were thrown out there for the technology being the letdown. We were named. And in the end, people lost money that day. Mm-hmm. People lost their jobs that day. There was a lot at stake when that happened. And so a marketing webinar that you do tomorrow for your business, you might have opportunity cost lost because you make that mistake. Yeah. You might have egg on your face and lost credibility. But in the world of corporate communications, we just simply never get a second chance. And if that's as a provider like myself or as the person that's being tasked to do it, you don't. So you just want to put yourself in the best place to succeed. And after early days of getting into the business, and I mean, when we started this business, the biggest a company in Canada was like $2 million in sales, doing 10 or 15 events a week or something like that. We were at 4,600 last year. Mm-hmm. We're going to do like 7,000 this year. The market has greatly expanded. There wasn't a lot of people who even knew how to make these things work. I said that off the top. There wasn't a playbook for this kind of thing. So we recognized that. We had to learn it as we went. And as we went through, we felt that it was very important not just to have the flashiest and the best technology or the coolest studio and the ideas, but to ensure that we gave people that roadmap for how to deliver these events with success so they can stop worrying about those failures mm-hmm. and focus on their message and all the other great stuff we've talked about in this series, right? Yeah. About making their message really work and really resonate with people.
That's great. So next week, or next podcast next week, that's not how these things work.
Sure, we'll come back next week.
Next podcast, which could be in 5 minutes, is it's going to be a great one. It's the anatomy of a webinar platform.
Oh, a platform point.
Yes. So that should be very exciting, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. Matthew Lay, in the meantime, thanks so much for this.
Thanks, Pete.